I wish I didn't have to turn off transcription because it drives me bananas. All right, it's a couple minutes after and folks are joining. So welcome everyone for our Generative AI Collaborative Learning Club. Again, Sonali's on vacation, so I'm filling in as a poor substitute, but we have a great speaker today. I would like to introduce Dr. Sambarey, and who has had lots of work in scientific collaborations. Dr. Sambarey is passionate about leveraging genomics and data analytics to advancing patient care. She has led multiple scientific collaborations at pharmaceutical and biotech partners, applying multimodal data analysis and generative AI to address critical clinical challenges. Previously, she has served as Senior Translational Solutions Scientist at Tempus AI, specializing in oncology data solutions. With a PhD in computational biology and over a decade of experience in bioinformatics, machine learning and network biology, and real-world data analysis. It is my great pleasure to introduce Awanti and to hand this over to you. And we're so glad you're here to speak to us about your work.
Thank you so much, Ron. And I'm just trying to get Teams to let me to share my screen. Just give me a minute. It's I'm sorry, it's asking me to quit and reopen. Would you mind? I'll be back. Sorry, just technical challenges. Just give me a minute. Yeah.
No worries. We have that with Teams sometimes too. Guessing this is the part when you have your computer saying updating patch 1 of 200.
I'm back.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
I didn't have to resort to dad jokes.
Oh. Just, I'm trying to share my screen. And again, this is going to be pretty informal. So like, just give me a minute. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Okay,
great. No. So firstly, thank you so much, Sean, for having me, and Sonali for having me as well, and for the introduction. So I'm actually very excited to come and talk to you about just applications of Gen AI in healthcare. I am by no means an expert in Gen AI in healthcare, but I've had the privilege of actually working in, seeing it being applied real time, both in my academic life and in my industry life, just at Tempus and until very recently at Truveta as well. So happy to talk about it. And I'm going to keep this very informal. So please feel free to stop and ask questions at any time. Yeah. Okay. So I like to begin with Arthur Clarke's Clarke's third law, actually, which is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I feel like through my academic career, when I started off on my PhD, I used very basic machine learning, okay, or linear regression, which in tools like that. And I was so excited about it, like many moons ago. And now to see it progress and to see like Gen AI being used, it kind of blows my mind. And I'm just very excited. It does feel like magic, to be honest. And back when ChatGPT, this is again from Jason Fries, who's one of my favorite researchers at Stanford. I'd love for you to check his talks out if you haven't already. But so what you see, there's been so much since 2023, 24, 25, actually, just this boom of ChatGPT. That's what you'd associate Gen AI with. and how it's passed the USMLE. And there's always debate, right? Like, oh my God, is it going to is it transformative? Is there, are there risks? Like, this cause so many opportunities for fraud, but wow, just so many opportunities for things to change and get better. And this was, of course, it's a lot better right now. But back when ChatGPT first started, right, and like clinicians were using it, or you're asking like, how can crushed porcelain, if you add it to breast milk, how tell me how that can support the infant digestive system, and it would just generate nonsense like this, saying yeah. And actually, I had tried something else too. I think I tried a prompt with ceramic, and then they're like, we don't encourage that you add ceramic to breast milk, but if you break it down to its mineral components, here's how minerals could enhance breast milk and enhance your infant nutrition. So, of course, use it with good judgment. But there are so many issues with generative AI breaking into the mainstream. But this was last year. Okay, so even since then, it's the scale at which it's functioning now and its outputs are amazing. Also, okay, please feel free to talk. I do tend to talk a little fast and get very excited, so stop me at any time. Yeah. um, yeah. So when it comes to healthcare data, right, and this was a really good review article by Sandeep Reddy, where he talks about how you can use generative AI in healthcare. Typically, like, sorry about this. Yeah. So you may have heard like different types of generative AIs, which is like the GANs, VAs, and large language models. And how we see it, this is not just necessarily applicable to healthcare, but overall, right? Like you'd have different kinds of multimodal information that we get clinically or otherwise. You've got text, images, or other data, and then the applications are pretty immense. What is Gen AI promised to be used in healthcare? This is its potential. It can be used in drug discovery, in diagnostics, documentation, healthcare, personalized medicine. That's the hope. How much of it is actually being used is, well, it's a work in progress. um, and as you know, and I know y'all are the Gen AI club, so y'all probably know more than me as well. um, the foundation for generative AI is sort of these foundation models. I'm not going to go into the weeds of the algorithms and how that's used, but typically the goal is you have a foundation model wherein you're inputting, if you look to the left of this, you're inputting different kinds of data across modalities, like mostly text or speech or 3D signals and images. And the way foundation models work is they're basically constantly training. They're working on self-supervised learning. And uh, if you're familiar with machine learning objectives, right? Machine learning, way back, the first foundation is okay. You have supervised learning and unsupervised learning. So supervised learning is when you would have a clear classifications of the data, right? I think they would talk about you have labeled data. So uh, your model knows, okay, this is the training data. This has been assigned to, okay, flower, that iris data set, for example, or flower shape versus flower color. And you're training it on that. And then you're building the model, and then that model will predict those categories. It's very straightforward. Not simple, but a lot more straightforward. But everything, and the reason why generative AI and all of these tools are useful is you're looking at everything that has no labels. You're trying to make sense of, you know, the unknown. So, or like the unsupervised source to say. So what's really cool with these foundation models, you're learning from a large amount of unlabeled data. You're allowing them to make representations without relying on explicit labels or annotations. And the other thing that helps with foundation models is it's trained on absolutely huge data sets. And if you've worked with it, I know if you've worked with real world data or electronic health records or any medical data, it's so noisy, it's so messy, but it's actual real life patient data, right? So, uh, and the model keeps getting better and better over time. So, for example, now if you go back to ChatGPT and ask that same porcelain and breast milk question, it will not answer the same way because it has been trained. It is learning from that. And over time, it just gets better over time. And the output of that is it's then adaptable with better efficiency, like so you can get information extraction or recognition, image captioning. This is so as to say for overall Gen AI and how it's used. But in the field of medicine, we have these specific medical foundation models Okay, and uh, those models, like you're parsing through millions of EHR with billions of data points. And I know I've worked with this personally, like at the output of it. So what this includes, this healthcare data, it's not just you're looking at patient encounters. So um, and if you're getting data from a health system, for instance, okay, you would actually get data for the entire patient's longitudinal history. So every possible, like, okay, I am going to see my general physician for a cough, but then I'm going to go see, go to an X-ray. Then I would have my admission history and everything that's linked to my insurance claims. There's claims data in this as well. So there's all of that sort of that's coming in the structured data format in electronic health records, which is your claims, your medications, your admission history, your labs. All of that goes into your and everything that can be built by codes, like CPT. I don't know if you're familiar with like ICD-10 codes, CPT codes, LOINC codes, all of those codes that are very, again, this is very US healthcare specific because we are regulated by the insurance and claims industry. And but what the models are also doing is you're also getting billions of data points from images, like X-rays or CTs or pathology images, and that comes under unstructured data because really you want all of those any clinical inferences are made by analyzing those images, right? It's not obviously clear, it's not, you're not getting it in structured fields. So the beauty of these models is it'll actually analyze these images and then extract them in structured fields and say, okay, I see X% obstruction. And we've actually done that. Like, a lot of industries are doing it. I'll say a lot of industries are doing it, and there's a lot of exciting use cases for those. And coming back to the most unstructured data form is like clinical notes. The level of depth, and I'll talk a little bit more about it and how it's being used in oncology, especially for like regulatory submissions and stuff. It's very cool. But yeah, uh, so there are medical foundation models, um, multiple kinds that are being used, and they parse through these zillions of data points. And then they can be adapted to different tasks. One is, okay, the question answering and the chart summarization bit is more at the healthcare implementation side. So if you're a doctor or a clinician, and okay, you can use it to answer questions. Hey, this is this patient's chart, so and so and so and so. What do you see? Like, um, yeah, ideally, how do you I mean, your doctor shouldn't be asking chat gpt, but hey, let's let's be real, people are using it on the side. It's all good, like it's just used to supplement the knowledge, but yeah. And are there any personalized treatment recommendations that you could make based on this person's history? um, but more for researchers and for like how different industries use it, to be honest, is here in this downstream, like, okay, one, are we looking at uh, what molecular insights can we gain from these patients? So or in oncology, for example, you may have different pharma clients who maybe they're interested in their particular drug of choice, right? So they're using real world data to see how have patients responded based on their real world based on the patterns that you see. Did they do better in drug A versus drug B? How do you quantify better? Do you have do you quantify it just based on you're seeing the tumor size shrinking, things like that? Or uh, sometimes in clinical notes you'll see patient reported outcome measures or prompts where it's all qualitative. There's no scale. So the doctor will note, different clinicians will note like, hey, okay, patient reports feeling better, patients report feeling more energetic, or the pain is less than before. So these are qualitative metrics which a lot of pharma industries are very interested in. I'll say this. The medical device industry is very interested in. So for some, okay, and in some cases I'll talk about from my experience. I've worked with I've worked with pharma and med device industries. So for example, some industries are focused on, say, they have these like implantation or like knee surgery implantation devices. Let's use that as an example, right? And then they wanted to do a regulatory submission to the FDA to show that, hey, our device actually reduces, like, actually helps in better mobility, it helps in reduced pain for the patient, and it's overall better than this competitor device. But then how do you go about proving it, right? So this is where, like, using real world data, EHR data and these patient-reported outcomes measures comes in very handy, because we were able to extract from patient data. I didn't even know this existed, that they were talking about, hey, uh, there are some pain scales which are fine, but also patient reports better mobility, or there's like better knee motion, there's range of motion, like, and then you have like physiotherapy follow up. The physiotherapist notes, uh, okay, patient is report there's an improved range of motion compared to week one, compared, follow up notes, follow up. So all of that is documented in EHR, and one very useful, and actually this is what a lot of the industry is using these LLMs and large language models for, is to understand patient responses and making sense of unstructured data. Of course, and then and I'll show you some examples where there are a lot of mistakes as well. But at every step, it should lead to like a better human AI collaboration. You should have doctors on call reviewing all of it. Does it actually make clinical sense? Things like that. But yeah, foundation manuals are very useful in data analytics. And yeah, this is what I was talking about, right? I know I I sort of spoke about it in the previous slide too. But what you'll notice with a lot of real world data is you're getting information captured in the form of codes. This is structured and unstructured. This is a mix of structured and unstructured data. So codes, the labs, procedures, all of this comes from hospital encounters. You may also have, and this is all associated to the billing IDs with claims data. So, I mean, if you're partnering with any claims-based vendor, they'll have all of the information. Then there's depth information linked to it. Then, so if you want to study, okay, outcomes monitored, how many of them led to better depth, survival analyses, things like that. And most of this is unprocessed texts and labs and images. And foundation models can combine multiple modalities during training. It's and this happens like in a matter of minutes. Okay, it's when you look at these outputs, like the NLP model progress on real world data is fascinating. I actually worked with this. I won't name them right now, but I worked with this incredible scientist who was responsible for, building the search indexing for one of the internet engines way back in the day, and now they're working on note extraction and like building the same thing in healthcare. Uh, so that it's actually big tech that's being applied here. So I'm sorry, most of my talk is just going to be expressing my fascination to this, to the progress in this field, because I've actually seen it happen, and it's incredible. Okay. Another way that we've seen generative AI being used is you can predict disease progression. This was an example study where they used I think this came out in 2024. And I will share a link to my slides too, which Ron, so you can take a look at all of these resources as well. So you can do these disease simulations by generating synthetic data. So this is in patients with type 2 diabetes. Sorry, and here this is just all of the common comorbidities, or what do you say, that are seen in patients with diseases, and they kind of simulated it. Like there was a model that they actually worked with. They analyzed all of real world patient data and used it to simulate the disease progression of around 5,000 synthetic patients, and showed that, okay, how can based on the prevalence of complications, what is your survival, or like any long-term survival that you would see. Yeah. And another way that we've seen Gen AI models is, you can use it to augment existing data as well. And yeah, I haven't personally worked a lot with imaging data, but some of it, like I know, again, a lot of industry partners or clinicians, they came to understand, okay, you have these images, especially with CTs, right? There are multiple sequences or series taken for that patient. How will they progress? Are you seeing worsening symptoms or improving symptoms? Uh, one of sorry, one of the challenges is like multi-image processing or multi-node processing per patient, and then trying to determine quantitative markers of disease progression, and how that can help you guide, your treatment decisions. What is the ground truth and what the model? Yeah, so the example, this is the ground truth, and these are like predictions based on this model. I'm sorry if this image is a little bit blurry. It should be a little clearer, but yeah. And based on the type of generative AI model, how close did it come to ground truth? You still do need a radiologist consult, but let's face it, like a lot of I keep coming back to like pharma industry because they are the ones maximally using these. They're approaching different real world data vendors um, to use it for their regulatory submissions, and then the FDA as well as European regulatory bodies like the HTA, they've now okayed, or they're rather encouraging. They're encouraging people to use real world data for external control arms studies. So, but the regulation is a little stringent. It's a little real world data can never match like the actual clinical trial, but there's a push from regulatory bodies across USA and across the world to be using this to actually help with your clinical trial, or like regulatory approval, or even like in post market safety assessment studies. So okay, so and I think I'll just talk a little bit about this because this is a big challenge in oncology that um, I faced both in academia as well as like in my prior companies that I worked for, which were oncology focused. So there are like different ways in which AI is being integrated in oncology, and this is not just generally like AI as well as generative AI. So you're getting patient identification, then you have patient identification comes back to trial matching as well. So you can use AI based on your, the drug of your choice that you're seeing, and you're seeing how these patients are responding. And then there are different tools. There are different. I think I don't know if you all have heard of Deep 6 AI, but Tempus recently acquired Deep 6 AI. So that actually helps with matching patients which have HIPAA compliant. It's all HIPAA compliant. Matching patients who meet certain criteria that could be used by companies to enhance their trials. Or like okay, and then you go back to the hospital network of choice, and you're matched with the network care setting. And if the doctor's okay to, help, then they'll enroll that patient in that trial. I bring up trial matching because normally, without generative AI or without these tools for trial matching, it can take months to get patients, and you have to actually the doctor has to agree and the patient has to agree, all of that. With Gen AI, actually, that time period, I know this for some companies, at least based on the network and for some field settings, that time has now reduced to 2 weeks. And that can be a matter of like life and death for some patients, a lot of patients, right, which go on these clinical trials. So that is an area that is really helpful, of course, as long as it's HIPAA compliant. And then you get all of this clinical radiographic pathology data, genetic data, the social determinants of health. Uh, I know Fred Hutch also does a lot of, there's like real world data analytics that you all do. So you must be familiar with a lot of this, how you're integrating multimodal AI integration, helping with clinical trial design, helping with treatment tolerance, outcomes. Um, what we've also seen is, and coming back to clinical trials, if patients want, like if, for example, using real world data and just using generative AI with all of these patients, information extracted from patients, you can actually replicate trial results in a matter of weeks. So you can actually compare trial effectiveness. You can do these effectiveness studies just using retrospective data. My bad. You can use retrospective data and use a lot of cool tools. And I'm happy to talk about any companies of interest that do this if you so wish. But yeah, can talk more in person as well. But the capabilities are there. And of course, when you come to discovery or biomarker discovery and treatment selection, that's the goal, right? But one of the challenges, and specifically when it comes to oncology, is determining, like, most oncology companies or vendors, they're interested in outcomes, they're interested in progression-free survival, both of which, like out of PFS particularly, PFS, they're interested in like any the RECIST criteria. and then the relapsed refractory status that can be inferred. And that's notoriously difficult to get unless you're actually sitting, unless you have an oncologist on board, unless you have like a radiologist on board who's going to be manually going through these images and then inferring them for you. And that's a big challenge. And I think probably that's where a lot of the focus of oncology Gen AI models is actually going to be this year. Um, is how do you determine progression? And for progression, uh, other than, I mean, you would need imaging support. You would also need to be analyzing multiple clinical notes because uh, in one of the challenges we faced, right? So we saw, so at one of the past companies I worked for, um, we would have multiple notes per patient. And sometimes uh, you'd have their treatment dosage, you'd have all of their encounters visits being recorded already in the structured lab data format. However, uh, especially with chemotherapy and things like that, what we noticed were a lot of patients go out of network because they're going to these specific infusion clinics, and that's not being captured in our like chemotherapy. They go to infusion clinics, and for some cancers which are like chronic, like, so you'd have multiple years of follow up, especially if they're diagnosed early, like, or a lot of pediatric cancers too. You'd have multiple years of follow up. So then how do you build an AI model that's following like hundreds, potentially thousands of notes per patient to see whether that they progressed or they relapsed back, or what worked, they went into remission and then they came back multiple months later? How much of that is recorded? uh, what if they changed insurance? There's a lot of complication associated with it. And uh, as of now, determining progression or like PFS just based on the model is quite difficult. I mean, I'm sure just the way the speed at which things are going, who knows? In the next couple of months, they may have figured that out. But yeah, uh, uh, getting a progression is a big challenge to see whether a patient like and like how are you defining it? And let's face it, like when you're looking at these trials, you're looking at the RECIST criteria, right? For tumor size and progression, or you're looking at this for some pediatric cancers, you're looking at like RANO and RAPNO criteria, or outside of the clinical trial setting, nobody uses it. So you would have to come up with, what a lot of people do is they come up with algorithmic rules, or they come up with proxies of progression, um, which is like you're looking for time to next treatment or like line of therapy. And I don't know if you all have noticed this too, but when I've reviewed some oncology notes, a lot of clinicians don't really believe in line of therapy. Like they're not specifically mentioning that, hey, okay, patient is on first line. Shoot, I'm remembering it. First line Pembro or something. I am forgetting my drugs. And then second line, third line. Of course, it's based on the NCCN guidelines, but a lot of it has to be inferred. Different clinicians will report it differently. Then there's a whole data harmonization process too. So you have to train your AI models on what the actual NCCN guidelines are, and those depend on, again, what type of cancer you've had, which again depend on what kind of mutations they had, because if you're EGFR positive NSCLC, your lines of treatment are different from, say, ALK positive NSCLC, uh, things like that. So oncology is a notoriously difficult space, as you know. And I think these are areas where unstructured data handling, a lot of companies then talk about just physician reported, say, physician documented progression or physician documented response, instead of specifying these particular ways. So they'll say, okay, you'll have clinicians saying the MRI confirms progression. So then, yeah, you have to be okay with it. You can say this is a progression event. Or as I said, if in structured data, they went on treatment X 4 weeks after diagnosis, and then 3 weeks later they're put on treatment Y, then you have to infer, okay, that they've actually progressed, that you mark it as a progression event. They went within a short period of time if the drug category changed. So it's complicated, but this is a space that I'm most excited about, because I think it's truly personalized treatment, right, for cancer. Not to say that GLP-1s or cardio space is not personalized, but oncology is a different beast. And yeah, uh, a lot of we see a lot of pharma, particularly, um, interested in using this data and using these applications for regulatory submissions and post-market safety. So you'll see more and more of it over time. Yeah, I spoke a lot about this, but yeah. Okay. And then this was some fun examples. That this Nijam paper, which is a pretty cool paper. So this is a simple conversation that they had with GPT-4. They're talking about, hey, what's metformin? And they talk about what metformin is. It's used for patients with type 2 diabetes. How does it work? Can anyone take it? And what other options are there? And I know a lot of folks are using GPTs or like Gen AIs to get their uh, medical consult. So this is just a very, what do you say, very broad answer. You can ask it to, you know, but sometimes this is an incorrect output again, as we all know. That seems complicated. I don't know why it's right. And they'll say, yeah, it's good for your doctor to figure out. And then there's ChatGPT trying to be funny that, hey, I have a master's degree in public health and I volunteered with type 2 not. Yeah, I looked it up on Google. And here you can even, which I don't quite agree. Like you're asking GPT to validate its own responses with, with the human, and it says like, no, it's there's an error, and the only error it points out is they don't have these personal experiences, or educational backgrounds like humans do. We all know this. Everybody knows this, but a lot of people still use it for medical counsel. And I definitely, I've seen so many errors, especially with cancer. It's getting better over time, but yeah, it's it's a little, yeah. And again, uh, I do know that people are, it's actually very easy right now to get a detailed chart review from GPT-4, but okay, so they, again, this paper just talks more about it, like how I have a patient with COPD who's experiencing shortness of breath. And you'll see a lot of companies across the disease spectrum, across therapeutic areas, talking about how they have these chatbots, where you can, for using for better interpretation of your clinical notes. But I don't know, I have thoughts on that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The like performance metrics and everything. But yeah, uh, okay. The reason why the data, the GPT-4 is just as good as, of course, as the data that's fed into it. Um, the other thing that I've seen personally actually is sometimes when you're using these AI models, they will consider the clinical notes as the ground truth for unstructured data. Okay, considering it, and this is an example. This is a term that's clinically used. It's called fat fingering, where you're entering it. You're having errors in your charts just by typos or whatever. So there are different kinds of errors. So for example, in this is a random example that I asked ChatGPT to generate. But for this patient with chest pain, the medications they did was like 500 mg instead of 50 mg. So, like if, because it's a like just literally like a small zero being entered, and if this was administered, if the pharmacist doesn't check it, it goes there. It can obviously lead to bradycardia, hypotension, and shock. But a nurse did catch this. And if you talk to different health systems and clinicians, this happens quite often, unfortunately, like the fat fingering error. And a lot of health systems, as they go towards integrating AI into their systems at the start for checking, uh, a concern is that AI is being trained on this, but hopefully the AI is smart enough to say, hey, is this erroneous? Because these are the standard doses. You're training the AI on what are the typical doses given for metoprolol. But it should always, I hope, I mean, that's what they say. Some health systems, they say that they'll always have a human error, a human person checking it too. But yeah. And these errors actually affect NLP models pretty frequently. This again, of course, misleading predictions, unsafe diagnosis. Sometimes, yeah. So there's something called poor named entity recognition. So here you'd have the MRN numbers or just the patient names uh, with a lot of real world data coming in. It's taking data from multiple health sources. So as a patient, we go to multiple health systems, right? So whenever we get access to real world data, or any data vendor gets access to it, it's all harmonized. You have to normalize that data. There are like these data standardization models, like OMOP, but they're essentially going by the patient name and they're going by the patient medical record number and the claims. So if there's an error in any of that, like or like tokenization, like patient tokenization with Datavant, that's a popular entity that tokenizes patients based on their numbers. Uh, then it leads to mismapping, and that does happen. Uh, it happens lesser and lesser, but as I said, it's being trained. And the model has to then check, okay, is it actually the same patient because you're getting the same token? Is it actually the same date of birth and things like that? But that's a type of error that you see in the model. Then there is, again, the incorrect sentiment or classification. Okay, it's the model will be as good as the data that's fed to it. You know, um, sometimes what we've seen, and this was a little scary because I had seen patient notes where the clinician had diagnosed as non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and another clinician had said as N-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the model actually just took the Hodgkin's lymphoma phrase. So that's a complete misclassification. But then, yeah, um, there's that gets better. So you need to supplement it with additional context and additional labs, and not just go off unstructured text while building your model. Yeah. Okay. I mean, again, I didn't really know what to talk about because there's so much, like, there are so many of these case studies that we've seen that's being used, particularly in oncology. And of course, one of the challenges, in addition to all of these errors that we've seen, is okay, data privacy and security is the biggest concern, right? Like, you have to be compliant with HIPAA. But that is only in the US. Not every country has like these regulatory, like there are most countries do, but many of them don't. And the regulations are different. Like, what's considered PHI is not standard. So for instance, like, usually if you're talking to like data vendors, they should have access to like redacted PHI redacted notes. But what does PHI mean? you know is gender PHI, is age PHI? Yes, anything that's identifiable is. But um, sometimes there is a difference in, like, okay, if for your address, so they may release information that is zip code 3, some may release up to zip 5, which technically is still under PHI category. Then if there are rare diseases, um, some companies, when they're getting all of these real world data, right, for rare diseases, because what would not otherwise be considered PHI, the regulations are even more stringent because it's so rare. Like, I'm trying to remember, like CIDP or something in pediatric patients, for example, it's very rare. Like, so the slightest of information is actually considered PHI. So everything we got was like highly redacted, and it was a little tough, other than genetic like mutation information. But it became a little tricky to have interpretations from them. Um, and there are biases in AI models, obviously, as we see that in our day-to-day interaction with ChatGPT or any of these Gen AI models as well. But those biases do propagate to, you know, healthcare data as well. And eventually, it comes down to trust, to building trust. I feel like one of them, yeah, there are several applications of AI in healthcare. We cannot escape it anymore. I think more and more healthcare systems are going to integrate it from the start to end, like end to end. But I think it really helps to have like chart review, or it helps to have a like very strict manual review for, as I showed, some of those fat fingering errors which I hadn't thought of earlier. um, but yeah, and then yeah, it's how well can it be integrated with existing systems. So this is sort of just the gist of where we've seen applicability of generative AI. And I wanted to ask you right now, what would you want to use generative AI in healthcare for? Do you see it supplementing your research, or do you see it, being an impediment, or just your thoughts, and just keep it open, or any questions that you may have for me?
Yeah, folks, feel free to jump in if you have any questions for Avanti.
Yeah.
I'll jump in because I can start first. So what do we want to use Gen AI for? Really, we have two big areas, one within clinical care delivery. And so we're looking at AI for things like administrative support in notes transcription,
Hmm.
diagnosis validation, and verification and things like that. The second part, which is actually I think more exciting, is on the research side. We want to use generative AI for um, big things, genomic mapping, drug discovery, protein
Correct.
folding, big, large scale data analysis processing that's expensive and hard to do by hand. But any other folks?
Yeah. And I think like especially like Sean, what you spoke about, right? I think most of what you said is Gen AI is actually being used for a lot of that already that I touched on, like, especially from the notes, like unstructured, yeah. And protein folding, yeah, very much in our Seattle zone backyard, right? With the Zera Therapeutics, if you're following that, came out of Judge Baker's lab, and yeah, if you're interested in like seeing protein folding, that's just and how it's being applied. That is the company to look for. Zero. Yeah. Um, I see there's a comment. Did anyone notice there was an NIH? No, I did not notice this about protecting human genomic data when developing Gen AI tools. Um,
Yeah, it's a brand. There hasn't been a lot posted at NIH lately, but this one got posted 6 days ago. Um, but it's really a reminder that the genomic data sharing policy already
yeah.
contains provisions about you're not supposed to put your controlled access data into public third-party Gen AI, right? And that you would have to specify uh, who you're sharing it with, and that includes the third party, like if whoever you're using for your Gen AI.
Oh, so yeah. Do you think this happened because of the whole 23andMe news, or this is an older one? I don't know. Cool.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I think this is probably something we'll need to follow up and, share services in our genomics core and areas where we're producing the genomics and personalized medicine, which is probably your area. Another big question, Avanti, why we've got you. In the context of clinical care, you mentioned a couple of use cases, and one was in the area of diagnostics, and we are getting a ton of interest in AI tools for radiology, breast cancer, tumor detection, dermatology, and areas like that. But
Mhm.
we've struggled a little bit, which is that diagnostics themselves can be heavily augmented with AI, but they can't be replaced. And so, um, uh, and the other thing is we're finding that many cases the testing algorithms are finding what appear to be anomalies long before there's medical intervention. So I wonder if you could talk about the development of diagnostics using AI or generative AI tools and kind of how does that work with in clinical care and supporting the patient care.
So I think, Sean, you you sort of did answer that in your question itself when it comes to augmenting diagnosis, right? As because in addition to like, I mean, I'm trying to think of tools at the top of my head. I mean, I can follow up with some of them later, but one of the cool things with using generative AI, and I think when I started off my talk, right, like with all of the multimodal data that AI has access to, they're sort of able to look at the bigger picture, like, okay, you had, and especially with information related to the patient's prior longitudinal history, you know and you're integrating all of that together to make a more informed prediction of diagnosis, which a clinician may miss. We've had those cases, right? You're just looking, okay, you look okay, and just looking for this particular marker or choice. If um you're clinically, you may be looking at just one or two data points, whereas with generative AI, you have access to essentially everything, right? Anything and everything that's there as it's learning. But again, I don't know if people are actually using that just blindly for diagnosis. I know there are some edge cases where they've said, okay, ChatGPT helped diagnose my so and so issue, which clinicians did not. But I think that's still very much a work in progress. Secondly, again, if do you see, and maybe I should ask that question back to you, like, are there specific inputs that you see, you're all working on, hey, to help aid you with diagnosis, like looking based on certain labs or based on genomic data or based on just clinical symptomology, what is sort of the challenge area? And accordingly, I can address that question.
Yeah, I think that, this is for the group in general too. The questions come up, are we underdiagnosing? And could AI tools help us address that? Are we diagnosing or misdiagnosing? And should
Mhm.
AI be involved in that? And in general, the clinical side has been coming back saying that we're diagnosing at a fairly high accuracy rate. But we could see generative AI as a way to augment and validate if there's possible cases. So we have very low cases where we completely missed it, or that we're undiagnosing or not diagnosing enough. So there's this kind of said, well, all these AI tools will do better, and the answer is, of course they will. But
Of course they will. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not really the problem we're trying to solve. We don't have a diagnosis problem. We do have other types of problems that we think that we generate AI. So that's my feeling, is that we're getting a lot of excitement about using AI-enabled diagnosis tools, but it really isn't the problem that we're struggling with in the clinical. The clinic is really struggling with what I would say is administrative overhead.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, actually, two things can be true, right? Like for sure, like there is a problem with the clinical overhead as well. But I think specifically for certain, I'm trying to remember a use case that came to mind. Like there was this very rare disease, like TK2D. It's a thymidine kinase 2 deficiency. Yeah, thymidine kinase 2 deficiency. It's a very rare mitochondrial disease, and one of the challenges that's faced with that is like it's always misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed because of like it can mimic other conditions and such as muscular dystrophy or uh, things like that. And I think you when you look at notes and stuff, people say, oh, unless the clinician specifically asks for that genetic test, you're missing it. And in that instance, I know that there was a lot of interest in looking at AI tools because AI was able to figure that out based on like a range of symptoms which clinicians would not look at otherwise. Or like, hey, or again, because it's unsupervised learning, right? You don't have a predetermined set. Okay, because you have X, Y, and Z for generative AI, X, Y, and Z, you'd be diagnosed with this, which a lot of clinicians do with medical knowledge, right? You would look at it deterministically. Whereas with generative AI, you have sort of a more probabilistic way of looking at that diagnosis based on just everything that you know. It's like absorbing all of medical literature and absorbing that patient's longitudinal history in labs. So I do think over time, um, it'll be, I don't know, I think, I don't know if there will be a reliance on AI, but I feel like it'll be definitely very much integrated right from diagnostics to therapeutics in the clinical space. Like there's no escaping it.
Gotcha. Any other questions for Awanti? Well, I did want to follow up one that is, and this is near and dear to my heart. So obviously in care operations, more the administrative side, we're really bound around things in the context of medical necessity and also evidence-based medicine. And I figured, what you could talk about the emergence of generative AI tools and their acceptance within the protocols for both medical necessity and with evidence-based medicine.
I think there is some resistance. Like, I don't know what you've experienced, but like, again, it depends on case by case basis. It depends on, in general, like how much of it is like old school thinking, where it's okay, no, this is not safe, or it's erroneous. And um, I don't know actually, but I feel like there's a little bit more resistance there, but that will likely change as still waiting for AI to prove its mettle, I guess.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
to add to that, we've seen a lot of the idea that we would use AI from external tools and applications, either by shipping the data out of our EHR or plugging into an HL7 data feed or doing more offline analysis.
Mm.
The discussion about medical necessity, evidence-based medicine, or the use of generative AI has been within generative AI capabilities within the EHR, both within the flow sheets and work streams, patient journey processing and things like that. So the story we're hearing from our EHR vendors, I won't name names, is that they don't want us to ship the data to an AI tool. They want us to put the AI tool in there or use their AI tool. And that's been the debate about medical necessity all around compliance, right? So whether EHRs are a compliance arbitrage or not is still debatable, but we have a huge investment in the EHR together with our University of Washington partners, and we're trying to make sure that we're balancing the guidelines of innovation and use of these tools at the same time, making sure that we are still following correct CPT and other billing practices so that insurance will cover these.
Yeah, no, but even like at EHR vendors, right? Like, of course, there's also cases where health systems are, a lot of data vendors are buying that data from health system vendors. So that compliance has to come from them. How much of it is de-identified before giving it to the vendor? That's why like all of this tokenization, like DataVant tokenization comes into play, right? How familiar are you with DataVant, Sean?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, so DataVant is like they kind of monopolize this whole business of tokenizing healthcare data. So let's say you're working with one vendor and we're working with another, like when it comes to exporting data, right? Or if you want to integrate patient data coming from different sources because one vendor doesn't have enough. So DataVant has these tokens where you can export the data and then you can perform data overlaps across patients. It's it's de-identified, but that's one way where to your question of where do people want to export their data or like then use it to AI tools. One way people there are companies doing it. They do it through this tokenization with DataVant. There are other places as well. Do I agree with it? I don't know. But otherwise, yes, there's a huge concern regarding patient privacy, and especially now with this whole 23andMe blowing up, right? I think the regulations are going to become much more stringent within the US. Does everyone else follow it? I don't know. I think that there are like the compliance, like the de-identification has to happen at multiple levels. But I would say a lot of the onus is on the healthcare systems who are providing this. I know they have incentive. They want to see, okay, there are really it's about saving patients' lives, right? So there are all of these vendors, there are all of these companies analysts trying to analyze this data and help make better personalized medication decisions to get it back. But yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your questions. I'm just
No,
getting
no, this is great and kind of dialogue. And so everyone feel free to chime in. I think my last question, I think to wrap up, is with my learning club hat on. For those of us outside who are interested in getting more information or learning more about either tools or practices or thought leadership and things like that, what advice would you give us for resources or how to get up to speed or keep connected to the discussion and the use of generative AI in healthcare?
Actually, that's a good question. I should have added in like a resource slide, but maybe when I send you this slide, Sean, I can add in a page of like, more up to date stuff. I mean, I'm also a researcher by training, even if I work in industry, but yeah, uh, of course, there are proprietary AI tools that are specific for each company that are working with it, but I would say keep an eye out for wait, are you saying if you want to use these in your research at Fred Hutch, or just generally like being up to speed with what's there available?
Yeah, I think we're struggling because there's so much. It's moving very quickly. Think about where we were a year ago.
Yeah.
We're looking at foundation models with commercial cloud solutions, obviously from Microsoft and Google and Amazon. We're also looking at our open source options and our own internal AI capabilities. And there's just so much to keep up on. As someone a little bit ahead of us, any advice on how to keep up?
Well, honestly, like what's available in the open source is great, like Anthropic and Google and OpenAI and all of that. But a lot of what your industry partners are using are they're building their own proprietary uh, LLMs. They're building their own proprietary models, and that's where the push would be. Like if you're going with them, and they're moving at a very different speed from what's publicly available. Um, an advice would be, I mean, I think, see, most of the, it's just as we would do as researchers, right? Like look at the performance metrics based on what you'd want to choose, based on what questions are being addressed. I don't have an actual answer for you right now. I'm sorry, Sean, because I'm thinking about it. Like, really, like, I've used Gen AI more in the industry setting, right? So it's all proprietary usage of what's being built and at like moving at a crazy speed. But I'd say looking out for Anthropic or looking out for Anthropic is like the competitor to Google to OpenAI, right? Like OpenAI and Anthropic are like your biggest LLMs. I would say those two because that's where most of the innovation is happening. Let me think about this some more. And actually, you've given me some homework to do before I send you this deck. I'll add in a section on that. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Any last questions?
I hope this was helpful. This was just a very casual thing. I don't know.
No, so Dr. Sambarey, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. It's very revealing, all the details, and it's such a important area as we improve our clinical care practices and really deliver the Fred Hutch message of bench to bedside. AI is going to be a huge component of our solutions as we connect these together. So thank you so much, and we'll follow up and send out these slides after the call.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
Great.
I'm
Thanks,
excited.
everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.